Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with sexy fish stew. That's right, this rustic but romantic recipe has all the same things we look for in a great Valentine. It looks great, it's very easy, it's a little rich, but not too heavy. So if you're looking for a simple and delicious dish to impress the object of your affections, this could be it. And here's how we're going to put it together. First, we have to cut up a leek, but we got to clean it first. And here's a great tip. If you take a knife and stick it in near the light side, near the root end, right about there, and just cut up towards the darker green parts, and you do that in 2 or 3 different places, all those leaves will separate, and the dirtiest part, which is always near the greenest parts, you'll be able to spread that open and rinse those out and get rid of all that sand and dirt, okay? Nothing spoils the sexiness of a stew more than a bunch of sand. By the way, if you do this with 4 or 5 leeks, you can make the coolest edible wig ever. So we're going to wash our leek, we're going to chop it up. You mostly want to use the lighter green parts and the white part. All right, so after we prep our leek, we're also going to prep some shallot. If you want to use garlic for this or green onions or other onion products, of course, go ahead. But because we're doing a sexy fish stew for Valentine's Day, we're going to use shallot, a much sexier onion. So we're going to peel that, we're going to slice that thin. All right, don't worry too much about precision cutting. This is all going to get stewed together. All right, we're going to go over to the stove where we have a couple tablespoons of butter on medium heat. We're going to add our shallots and our leeks with a big, giant pinch of salt. Looks like a lot of salt, but we're going to cook some potatoes in this eventually. And we're going to sweat that over medium heat in that butter for a good while. And do not rush this. You want those vegetables to sweat in that butter for at least 10 or 15 minutes. We want that stuff to get very soft and kind of melt down into that butter. All right, make some casual conversation with your Valentine. You can say things like, hey, I like that shirt. It looks good on you. You know, romantic stuff like that. All right. So give it a stir once in a while. And while that's cooking, let's go ahead and trim our potatoes. I'm going to use these little red potatoes. These are a French red fingerling, right? But any small red potato will work. And instead of just dumping them in unceremoniously, we're going to take a knife and cut around the skin just like that, right around the center. And that's going to do a couple things. It's going to allow our amazingly flavorful sauce to permeate the potato. It's also going to make it look really cool. But most of all, it's going to show your Valentine that you have a great attention to detail and that you're willing to do that little extra. I mean, come on, if you're willing to do this to a potato for a simple stew, what else are you prepared to do to make them happy, okay? And of course, if they comment on how you trim the potatoes, you will use the line, I thought you would find it appealing. So we're going to prep the potatoes just like that. We're going to keep those in cold water until needed. And then it's back over to the stove where by now our leeks and shallots should be nice and soft. At that point, we're going to add some white wine and stir that in. We can raise the heat up to medium-high at this point because we want to bring that up to a boil. We're going to boil that for 2 minutes just to reduce it slightly. And then we're going to add in some chicken stock. And why chicken? Because I'm pretty sure you don't have fish stock, right? You don't? That's what I thought. So this will give us a little extra richness that water won't, but it will not fight the flavor of the fish. So a little bit of chicken stock, give it a stir. Again, we're on medium-high heat. All right, that's going to come back to a simmer. And while that's happening, let's go ahead and slice a little bit of fennel. So I have 1 small fennel bulb. I'm going to use about half of this. So it's about half a cup, I'd say. Fennel has such a beautiful flavor in this. It's really going to work with the tarragon we add later. It has that sweet kind of licorice anisette flavor that's really beautiful in a fish stew. So once that's sliced, you go ahead and dump that in. Everything should be simmering by now. All right, we're going to go ahead and add our potatoes in. We're going to put the heat to medium, and we're going to cover this and cook it until the potatoes are tender. And it's okay, they're not all totally submerged. As long as it's covered, let it simmer. After about 5 or 6 minutes, maybe give it a stir. And even though some of those potatoes were different lengths, they're all about the same thickness, so they really will cook all about the same time. All right, so I'm going to give those a stir. I'm going to put the lid back on and let those finish cooking. I'm about 5 minutes away, I would guess, which gives me just enough time to prep my fish. So I'm going to use some rock cod, which I think is a gorgeous fish. If you're on the East Coast and can get red snapper, that would work great. But pretty much any white flesh fish is going to work here. This is, of course, totally boneless. Make sure the fishmonger takes out all the bones for you. And we're going to cut that in nice big chunks. And that's going to make the cooking and timing of this very, very simple, as you'll see. So I'm going to cut that up. I'm going to go back over to the stove, where by now, our potatoes are perfectly tender. And we know because we test them with a knife. And they should not be falling apart at this stage. They should just barely be tender, because this is still going to cook for another 5 minutes or so with the fish. And then the other thing I want you to do now and several times throughout this process is keep tasting for salt. Those potatoes probably absorbed all the salt that was in there. So I'm going to give it another shot. I'm also going to splash in some heavy cream, a little bit of cayenne. This is, after all, a sexy stew. All right, stir that in. And that is looking pretty amazing. At that point, we're going to go ahead and put in our fish chunks. All right, stir it around. Make sure they're all kind of evenly distributed. Our heat is still on medium. Once it's all evenly spaced out, I'm going to sprinkle some beautiful fresh tarragon over the top. You don't need to stir it in. Just leave it on the top. Put the lid on and let it cook just like that for 3 minutes. And the good news is after 3 minutes, it will not be cooked all the way through, so you'll be able to stir it without it falling apart. All right, so give it a stir, redistribute everything evenly. And you can see how gorgeous that skin is from the rock cod. And it actually kind of tightens up and curls the piece of fish into like a little mini, I don't know, like lobster tail looking thing. Very sexy shape, I think. And then all we're going to do, we're going to reduce the heat down to medium-low, and we're simply going to cook until the fish flakes. See that? That piece will break off if I push it with a spoon. That's done. Turn off the heat. Taste for your final seasoning adjustments. Salt, maybe a little cayenne. And once your fish is cooked through and it's seasoned to perfection, go ahead and spoon that up into a hot bowl. Do not serve this in a cold bowl. All right, that would be a very bad reflection on you as a cook and a person and a lover. So spoon that in, maybe a little more tarragon on top, and there you go. That is one sexy fish stew. The fish is going to be moist and succulent and aromatic and flavorful. No way that fish is going to be dry because it's already wet. Those potatoes are going to absorb that flavorful broth. And maybe the best part of all, you're going to serve this with some nice crusty bread. I had some beautiful walnut sourdough that just went perfect with this. And as sexy as this fish stew is, there's really nothing sexier than dipping bread into something that delicious. So I really hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.